Right, so Wikileaks founder Julian Assange has lost his latest appeal to avoid extradition to the US, where he is wanted basically for the crime of exposing government corruption and war crimes. The sort of stuff we in the public domain ought to get told. I certainly think. Surely you do as well. But rarely do. Because it takes a special kind of person, a journalist, to do that, knowing the risks involved, but prepared to take them anyway. Assange has dedicated his life to doing just that via his organisation Wikileaks, dumpers of much secretive government info into the public domain. Little wonder then that such governments might bring charges against him, real or trumped up, in order to get a hold of him and bring him to what they are risibly calling justice. They just want to get him, full stop. Assange is remembered by many for being holed up in the Ecuadorian Embassy from 2012 to 2019 to escape charges being made against him, at that time accusing him of rape in Sweden. The Swedish government wanted him extradited there to face these charges. He always denied the crime. It was widely seen as a pretext to have him extradited to the US in due course, who wanted him on charges of hacking, basically, in order to get the data that he was dumping. Conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, as they colourfully put it, and reinforcing that thinking is the fact Swedish authorities didn't actually need Assange extradited to question him. They could have just come here and done it. Sweden, in fact, wanted to drop the charges against Assange back when the UK's Crown Prosecution was working with their equivalent, the Swedish Prosecution Authority, to extradite him, and were told by the CPS at that time to not dare get cold feet over it. Again, all the strangest, since they could just come here, question him, and carry on with their case. It all lent more weight to the fact that people thought it was really all about sending Assange to the US. That was the end game at play here. The CPS at that time was, of course, run by a Director of Prosecutions, and at that time that was one Keir Rodney Starmer. A few years later, in 2017, another investigative journalist from Italy, Stefania Maurizi, uncovered further scandalous going on between the CPS and the SPA at that time, showing that large amounts of the correspondence between the CPS and SPA concerning Assange have been destroyed, amounting to thousands of pages apparently, all done against proper regulation and procedure, and on the authority of we know not who, but we can speculate. Sweden did drop its case against Assange finally in 2019, at which point it would appear, in order to get their man, a deal was struck to end the asylum being offered by Ecuador at their embassy. Allegedly, the International Monetary Fund were prepared to offer Ecuador a loan, and the outcome of that application was linked to ending Assange's political refuge. This was, at least according to Assange's father. Whatever the reasoning, though, Assange's asylum there was ended, and he was, of course, dragged out, scenes many of us remember, for the brutality of it all, the roughness of his treatment. Assange has been imprisoned ever since, a political prisoner, effectively, his health seriously declining, and the UK government still hell-bent on packing him off to the US, where he faces some 175 years in prison for exposing US state secrets, not least including apparent war crimes. More likely, it would be a death sentence. High-profile prisoners in the US have a habit of meeting untimely ends. Assange has always courted controversy. Some celebrate him, others hate him. But he's currently incarcerated in Belmarsh. Even those trying to support his case have difficulty trying to see him. Yet as much as he's treated as a criminal for his work here in the UK right now, he's won numerous journalism awards the world over for the exact same thing he's now locked up for and facing further imprisonment for. The suspiciousness of the behaviour of worldwide governments regarding Assange over the last 10 years, and the conflicting opinions going around leave people not really with a clear idea of what to think of the guy. And I include myself in that, actually. I've often found myself not really knowing what to make of him over the years. But my thinking is clearer now, not so much because I know more, still so much of what he is accused of is shrouded in secrecy, but it's the sheer amount of time this has been going on that after more than 10 years, the US is still utterly determined, it seems, to have Assange extradited there. And all in all, I can only conclude it's because they need to make an example of him to put off any other journalist being worthy of the name and not letting anyone else or anything put them off in the pursuit of the truth. The US government has been shamed and embarrassed by materials Assange and Wikileaks have leaked. How dare one man be responsible for that? That's what I believe all this comes down to. Extraditions are 99% politics and 1% law, as Assange's wife Stella famously said. And she's right. If the US was more interested in justice, particularly since WikiLeaks haven't solely targeted the US, they should be happy for justice to be carried out wherever he is. But they aren't and never have been. So the whole affair screams ulterior motive. Of course, the Tories have helped with this. Priti Patel signing off on Assange's extradition last June, something that has been held up by legal challenge ever since, not least because the main accuser of Assange in all of this, an Icelandic convicted criminal who lied about Assange at the behest of the US prosecution, and all of this has come out, incidentally, in exchange for immunity, has now been proven and shown to the world. The US case against Assange is actually in pieces. It's a big old setup to excuse what is basically extraordinary rendition now. Yet despite even that, the latest appeal has just failed, moving Assange ever closer to that extradition. The reason for that failure, however, may well lie with the High Court judge who was overseeing it, because he's got quite the reputation by now. Justice Jonathan Swift issued a 3-page document in response to this 10-month-long appeals process. The appeal dismissed on all grounds for overturning the extradition. I'd have put money on this being the outcome, with Swift overseeing it. Reporters Without Borders director Rebecca Vincent said it is absurd that a single judge can issue a 3-page decision that could land Julian Assange in prison for the rest of his life and permanently impact the climate for journalism around the world. The historical weight of what happens next cannot be overstated. It is time to put a stop to this relentless targeting of Assange and act instead to protect journalism and press freedom. Our call on President Biden is now more urgent than ever. Drop these charges, close the case against Assange, and allow for his release without further delay. She is absolutely right, of course. It is absurd that one judge can do this, but the judge in question is Jonathan Swift, and he has form for unfathomable judicial rulings. Deportations to Rwanda, for example. He sided with the government with regards to allowing the deportations to proceed before the European Court of Human Rights overruled his ruling and stopped the flights. Concerns about Rwanda being a safe country among the reasons cited, something Swift himself regarded as being in the realms of speculation. Not so much now when they're on the brink of war with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Another case he presided over at the High Court concerned the uprating of benefits to universal credit claimants during the pandemic, not also being offered to people on the older benefit system, the legacy benefit system as it's called. He actually acknowledged the unfairness of that, but still ruled against the claimants in favour of the government. A clear case of discrimination, some claimants getting it, others not. How is that right? How can it be anything but discriminatory? And he still sided with the government. It's worth pointing out that prior to becoming a High Court judge in 2018, he was the government's main lawyer and has continued to be overtly government-minded ever since. It's like he never changed jobs. He just got knighted and got given the KC at the end of it. His impartiality has been questioned, not least by the Good Law Project, amongst others, and for good reason, it seems. But it's not over yet, folks. A statement by Stella Assange afterwards read, "On Tuesday next week, my husband, Julian Assange, will make a renewed application to the High Court. The matter will then proceed to a public hearing before 2 new judges at the High Court, and we remain optimistic that we will prevail and that Julian will not be extradited to the US, where he faces charges that could result in him spending the rest of his life in a maximum security prison for publishing true information that revealed war crimes committed by the US government." All of this whilst Reporters Without Borders, incidentally, who have hired a lawyer to simply try and gain access to Assange to check on his well-being and help with his case, because at every turn his visitation rights are apparently being denied. One day, we will get to the bottom of everything vested interests in seeing Assange extradited have been doing during the last decade and right now. It's going to be a reckoning for all concerned, I'm certain of it, because the story of Julian Assange, however it ultimately concludes, isn't one that's ever going to be forgotten. We're living through some incredibly important times for international journalism and for whistleblowing, and all things considered, it's really not a story that we can afford to lose. And after you've liked, shared, and subscribed to this channel, because why would you not? You've watched until the end, haven't you? You're here. If you're watching this bit, perhaps a bit more will float your boat. So amongst the hundreds of other videos available to you on a multitude of topics, here's my recommendation for you. A bit more on Justice Sir Jonathan Swift and his backing of deportations, and I'll catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.